Let me introduce you to a woman. This is Candace, my new wife. From today, she will be living with me. You just need to sign the divorce papers and get out. What? What are you talking about, Paul? I don't understand what you mean by divorce and telling me to get out. Let me be clear, it's your fault. You can't have children even though you're a woman. I don't need a woman who can't have children. Just sign the papers quickly. One day suddenly, my husband Paul brought home his mistress, Candace. He declared that he would live with her and divorce me. Next to him, Candace wore a smug smile. Paul also had an air of triumph, but I calmly informed him. Well, I've already moved to a new place. I divorced you a month ago. Huh? What is that? It's pointless to lie about it now. I understand you're upset, but it's useless. It's funny how you say that, ma'am. You can't just decide to divorce on your own, can you? I'm carrying Paul's child. You're completely defeated. It's unsightly, so pack your things quickly. Despite being looked down on by my husband and Candace, I was only stating the facts. I knew everything. That's why I had been preparing for retaliation until today. No matter how much they apologize, I will never forgive them. I will make them realize how foolish they are. Right after I smirked slyly, my mother-in-law appeared from another room. Seeing me, she began to smirk as well, just like Paul and Candace. Janet, you're still here? You've heard from Paul, haven't you? Please divorce him quickly. I don't want you to cause him any more pain. Mom, listen. Janet says she divorced me a month ago. That's impossible. Really, Janet, you're such a bad wife. You're infertile and now you've gone mad? You can't submit a divorce application without his signature. Indeed, like mother, like son. Their contemptuous looks were identical. Genetics are indeed frightening. I sighed heavily and then slowly began to speak. You're right, mother. I can't submit it without his signature. But if I have Paul's signed divorce application, then a divorce is possible. Do you understand now? I submitted the divorce application with his signature. What are you talking about? When did he sign the divorce papers? Stop talking nonsense. There's no nonsense. He definitely signed it in front of me. He just doesn't remember. At that point, my husband seemed to realize something and spoke up. Janet, did you make me sign while I was sleeping? If so, that's despicable. Making me sign the divorce papers without my knowledge, what were you thinking? I see, there was that option. Well done, Paul. Yeah. You seem to be really clever and cunning. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. As I said, you signed it in front of me. You always threatened divorce whenever I slightly disagreed with you. You brought out the already filled out divorce papers when you were drunk. I just submitted them to the lawyer. You really don't remember, do you? Paul, I didn't hear anything about this. Do you really not remember? I wouldn't do such a thing. I'd like to say, but honestly, I don't remember. Anyway, I submitted it a month ago, so the divorce is finalized. I've also moved to a new place, so I'll be leaving soon. As I spoke in a matter-of-fact tone, my husband appeared frustrated. But when Candace placed her hand on his shoulder and smiled, he puffed up his chest as if triumphant. When I think about it, there's no problem. It has just saved me the trouble of going to the lawyer. Now I'm officially single. All that's left is to remarry Candace and start a new life. How does that feel, Janet? Frustrating, right? You did a good thing for a useless woman who can't have children. Will you pack your things and leave next? I always thought you were not a match. Paul works for a well-known large company. He's elite. With your ordinary looks and below-average everything, Janet, you are as different as night and day. Thus, with similar expressions, both my husband and mother-in-law were triumphant. I had heard my mother-in-law bragging about her son more than enough since getting married. I was even forced to sit straight and listen for more than an hour at a time. Just the other day, the president personally praised him. His promotion is guaranteed. That's my Paul. A woman like Candace is suitable for him. So please never appear before us again. It's refreshing to cut ties with a failure. Of course. I also don't want to see you again. But it's really sad. You don't understand anything at all. Unable to contain it, I burst out laughing. My mother-in-law, husband, and Candace all gaped at me. Hey, Janet, what do you mean? What do you mean by saying we don't understand anything? I won't allow you to insult not just me but also my mother. I'm not insulting you. I just feel pity. Mother-in-law and you're good at finding faults in others but blind to essential things. Right, Candace? As I turned my gaze to Candace, she averted her eyes. Seeing this, both my husband and mother-in-law looked perplexed. Here, I hit the core of the issue. Paul, you can't remarry easily, you know? Because she already has a husband. Silence enveloped the room. My husband was the first to burst out laughing. Come on, what are you starting with now? Such a fabricated story? Honestly, I'm disappointed. It's pointless to expect anything from your brain. Exactly. It's foolish to make up such obvious lies when you've impulsively divorced. And now have no way back. Seizing the moment, perhaps to ride on the momentum. Candace wrapped her arms around my husband's and pressed her body close to his. The sensation of her soft skin made his nostrils twitch visibly. It was utterly disgusting. Your wife is just jealous because she is infertile. Please don't bully her too much. Then she said to me. It's sad for someone who couldn't be blessed with a baby. And was abandoned by the person you loved most. You are the pitiful one. Candace is really the best. She's just great. Unlike the infertile failure Janet, she has a big heart. Yes, Janet is a pitiful person. She wanted children but couldn't have any, and her future looks bleak. Saying she moved to a nearby place, but it's probably a shabby apartment. Well, it suits you, Janet. The three of them teamed up and threw snide remarks at me one after another. Like they were playing a coordinated game. Well, I had anticipated this, so there was no need to panic. I just needed to make my next move calmly. It's easy to say anything about a poor infertile woman, isn't it? But everyone, can you say the same after seeing this? What is this? I handed a piece of paper to Candace, who slowly began to read it. Right after that, her face drained of color so quickly you could almost hear it. What's wrong, Candace? You froze all of a sudden. What's written on this piece of paper, what? My husband, who checked the content next, turned just as pale. Realizing something was terribly wrong, my mother-in-law snatched the paper from Candace. This can't be true, can it? It says here that Paul is infertile? I'm sorry to say, Mother, but it's true. The reason Paul and I couldn't have children was not because of me, but because of him. When I started infertility treatments, I asked him to cooperate as well. It's something that makes sense only when both partners participate. However, he blamed the infertility on me and left all the treatment to me. So, I managed to please him enough to at least get a sample from him. And immediately went to submit it. The results are as you see. I waved another piece of paper in my hand while explaining. It was my test result, indicating that there was no problem. What must they be feeling now? They pitted me for being infertile, when in reality, it was my husband who was infertile. Their positions must be quite uncomfortable now. As I looked at them sternly, my husband suddenly spoke up. Why didn't you say anything until now? If you knew, you should have told me immediately. This is why you're a failure. Could you not lash out just because you're shocked? I wanted to tell you when it was just the two of us. But you never listened to me. Right after the infertility test results came out, you started staying late at work more and started ignoring my calls and emails. How was I supposed to tell someone who's hardly ever home? Wait, did you know about Paul and Candace's affair from the beginning? My mother-in-law asked with a horrified face, so I smiled kindly at her. Yes, I already knew. When he started staying away from home so blatantly, anyone would suspect an affair. Once I started suspecting, I had to investigate thoroughly, right? So I looked into both Paul and Candace. My mother-in-law collapsed weakly to the floor. My husband stood motionless, staring at me like a statue. I clapped my hands sharply with a smile on my face. Now, here's a question. It has been revealed that Paul is infertile. But Candace is pregnant. Whose child could it possibly be? The answer must be clear to both my husband and mother-in-law by now. Just as I said earlier, actually, Candace is already married. This means she has been deceiving Paul and my mother-in-law. The air was charged with tension, creating an eerie atmosphere. My husband and mother-in-law silently looked towards Candace. Their eyes, which had been gleaming triumphantly just before, were now dull and lost their shine. A bead of sweat trickled down her forehead. Her lips, tightly pressed together, trembled slightly. And she nervously tapped her elbow while crossing her arms. Yet, as expected, a woman capable of having an affair is different. Her brain must be wired differently from ordinary people. Candace managed to lift the corners of her mouth as much as possible. There's no proof. We never know whether the test results are true or not. You could have fabricated these test results, couldn't you? My husband and mother-in-law turned to me with startled faces. Do they still have the energy to fight back? Such a waste of energy on this parent and child. Candace straightened her back and puffed out her chest, boldly facing me. The core of your claim that I'm married is based on that piece of paper, which states that Paul is infertile, right? It wasn't directly told by a doctor, and it could be considered a forgery, couldn't it? If his infertility is denied, then the child in my belly is genuinely mine and Paul's. You'll have to take responsibility for slandering me by calling me a married woman. I thought if witches existed, they would laugh like her. Smiling unnaturally with teeth bared and eyes narrowed like a crescent moon. Candace must have deceived and trapped people before. But there's nothing to fear. The one who needs to take responsibility is Candace. Oh, you really are pitiful. You could have just admitted it and apologized. Here, Candace, I'll give this to you as a gift. Make sure to accept it properly. Here, I pulled out a card-shaped paper and placed it in her palm face down. She looked puzzled but flipped the paper over. And her complexion changed the moment she saw the text written on it. Her body began to tremble violently, and sweat poured down her face. Noticing her odd behavior, my husband couldn't help but speak up. Candace, what's wrong? Is that a business card? Responding to his concerned voice, she silently handed over the card. It read a Gail Robert. Then, my husband collapsed in shock. Like Candace, he trembled as he stared at the business card. Wait, what's going on with both of you? What's so special about that business card? Not understanding the significance of the name yet, my mother-in-law almost snatched the business card from my husband's hand. Let's see. Harrison Corporation's CEO's Gail Robert. Wait, isn't that where you work? What's the relationship between the president of that company and Candace? Tell me, Janet. Say it. Mother, you already know, yet you ask me to say it? You really want to escape from reality, don't you? Well, I'll wake you up then. Gail Robert is Candace's husband's name. This time, my mother-in-law forcefully fell to the floor. She too began to tremble violently all over. No, this can't be true. Having an affair with the president's wife of the company you work for. Paul, did you really not know anything? How could I know? I didn't even know Candace was married. Wait, you mean I slept with the president's wife? That's really bad. While the two of them were more agitated than ever, Candace, still staring at me, bit her lower lip. She must have been told by my husband that I was a woman who couldn't do anything. Her condescending attitude made it obvious. Thus, I had been in contact with President Gale, Candace's husband. Knowing that I had outsmarted them must have deeply frustrated them. How did you find out about my husband? Well, it's because. Just as I was about to answer, my mother-in-law suddenly stood up and grabbed me by the collar. I was taken aback by her aggressive approach. Janet. I'll pay you compensation if you want. I'll do anything, even apologize thousands of times, so just keep this between us. Let's pretend this never happened. That's the best solution. I was beyond angry. I was astounded by her desperate attitude. After calling me a failure time and again, now she wants to pretend it never happened? As if life works that conveniently. People end up in these situations because they think only of themselves and belittle others. Even if we pretend this incident never happened, similar issues will likely arise again. Without change from my husband or mother-in-law, any quick fix is meaningless. It's too late for anything, Mother. President Gale knows everything. Why do I know that Candace's husband is President Gale? Because he came to me first. He had already figured out the affair between Paul and Candace. What? You mean President Gale reached out to you, not the other way around? Everything's out in the open? As I quietly nodded, she collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. President Gale had sensed the signs of Candace's affair and started an investigation. It seems he was more thorough than I was. It seems that President Gale is preparing to divorce Candace. Well, isn't that convenient? Now Paul can remarry her. Wait. It's true that Robert Gale is my husband, but the baby is Paul's. Even now, Candace was trying to cover up her lies. She always did play her role well. Despite her makeup running from all the cold sweat. I cut off her words and blocked her last escape route. It's President Gale's child, right? There's no mistake. It has been confirmed with the help of President Gale. How? I don't remember anything. Didn't President Gale ask you to have your blood drawn? Well, he did say it might be good to check my health or something. She looked bewildered. The glamorous image she had when she first entered our home had completely vanished. And she seemed to have aged a decade in just moments. Nowadays, it's common to use a pregnant woman's blood and a man's epithelial cells. A swab from the mouth can do. With these, prenatal paternity testing is possible. No way, you had all that prepared? Eventually, Candace sat down exhausted. Her neatly styled hair had become a mess due to the excitement. Everyone seemed to finally understand the situation in their own dazed ways. I placed my hands on my hips and exhaled with satisfaction. Then, my husband started muttering something. I couldn't hear the words, but his expression didn't seem positive. I tensed up again, ready for a confrontation, when he suddenly looked up and shouted. This is ridiculous. After all the sweet nothings you whispered to me, it was all lies? What were you thinking, having an affair with someone from your spouse's company? You unreasonable woman. He was shouting not at me, but at Candace. A new vitality returned to her eyes, which had been listless. Didn't you know? Every beautiful rose has its thorns. Just because you had a taste doesn't mean you should take it seriously. You are really silly, she retorted sharply. Paul's frown deepened. Oh, are you angry? You have such unnecessarily high pride. That's why you're easy to handle. You never think that you're just being played, moving exactly as told, just like a pet. What did you say? Who do you think you're talking to? Candace finally stood up and moved close to Paul. Her gaze intense enough that he stepped back slightly. Listen, the reason our affair was discovered is because you were a failure. Who are you talking to? I am the wife of a president. You have no right to complain, even if you're being played. Paul took a few steps back and gave a dry smile. I see, that's your true nature. I understand now. He walked past Candace to stand in front of me and suddenly took my hand. Janet, I've come to my senses. It's been a roundabout journey, but I've finally found true love. You're the only one for me. Incredibly, his lips swiftly moved towards mine. Instinctively feeling terrified, I narrowly dodged his kiss. I kicked him in the groin without hesitation and retreated to a corner of the room. My back was instantly drenched in sweat. Paul was moaning but still calling my name. My mother-in-law, for some reason sparked by the words true love, was vigorously defending Paul, pushing for our reconciliation. Paul, it's great that you've come to realize your true feelings. Just a little more persuasion for Janet. There's no man as elite and wonderful as you. I just want this to end. Ignoring my husband, I turned to my mother-in-law, who was still giving her son adoring looks. Mother, both of you said earlier, right? A woman who can't bear children is useless. I don't think so at all, but Paul is useless, is it correct? The sparkle in her eyes vanished in an instant. Her gaze awkwardly dropped as she hunched her shoulders and shrank. That should stop her from dreaming too much. As for my husband, he was completely frozen like a statue. Being called useless must have been a first for him. He's always been clever, always praised by adults around him. But that's not enough. It's about how and where you apply those clever skills. It seems my husband lacked moral integrity from the start. I looked at him one last time, ensuring I kept a safe distance. You were cursing Candace for deceiving you. But you don't have the right to complain since you deceived me as well. What goes around comes around. Paul's eyes regained sanity under my icy gaze. Still clutching his sore groin, he reached out desperately, but I did not take his hand. It was all too late now. Do you now understand how it feels to be called useless? When I smiled at him broadly, he finally stumbled forward and apologized. I'm sorry, Janet. It was all my fault. Can you forgive me just this once? I'll show you that I can change. They say cheating is a sickness, right? It's not something that can be cured easily. Why would I, now a stranger to you, patiently deal with that illness? With those words, I finally left my in-laws' house, without looking back once. Afterward, Paul was sued for damages by both me and his boss. And he was also fired from his company for reasons of moral turpitude. Even so, for a while, his pride as an elite seemed to protect him. And he continued to behave as if nothing had changed at home. However, he couldn't handle household chores at all, and without me, who always maintained a disciplined lifestyle, his life quickly became slovenly. He was constantly fighting with his mother, who had been so close to him. Since the president had spread the word about Paul's misconduct within the industry, his job hunting did not go well. His debt didn't decrease but instead continued to grow, and eventually, He became so desperate that he reached out to me for help again. Of course, I rejected him outright. Paul is now living only to repay his debts, juggling low-paying part-time jobs. I heard that the president did not overly blame Candace during her pregnancy, not wanting to stress her due to the unborn child. Therefore, Candace, deluded by this considerate treatment, believed she was forgiven. She lived the life of a wealthy president's wife as if nothing had happened. But only until she gave birth. Soon after the child was born, the president took the baby and left it to his parents. Then demanded a divorce from Candace. As soon as her postpartum recovery was sufficient, she was to be kicked out of the house. And hysterical crying could often be heard from the house at night. Meanwhile, I managed to find a new job and began a carefree single life. A life without anyone attacking me unilaterally was truly stress-free. As I lived nurturing myself, I remarried a few years later to someone I met through work. The following year, I fulfilled my long-held desire to have my own child. Holding the tiny life in my hands was more lovely than I could have imagined. And I vowed to dedicate everything to making this child happy.
I'm getting married to someone who works under me. Let's get a divorce.
Along with these words, David slammed a divorce application filled out completely on the desk.
Ever since you had our son, you haven't been as attractive or put in any effort. Huh, I'm fed up with you.
Fine, but just so you know, I will definitely be claiming for compensation. So you better prepare yourself. In response, I argued back to my husband. He didn't like what I said and snorted in response.
You're such a greedy woman. You can't even raise our son by yourself, so don't get all arrogant.
Say what you want, but I have every right to child support and compensation. I'm not the bad one here. It's all on you. My name is Jenny. I'm a housewife in my 30s, raising a middle school son, James. I've been married to David, who is 3 years older than me, for 15 years. We both work at the same company, and our involvement began when he became my mentor. We've worked in the same department ever since. We used to be mentor and mentee, but now we barely chat at work. We have both climbed the career ladder and hold respectable positions. Yet I still sometimes think, perhaps foolishly, that it must have been fate that brought my husband and me together.
Jenny, I've finished the documents you asked for.
Already? That was quick, Susan. I'm in charge and have my own team now, and there's one person in particular that I really like. Her name is Susan. She's quite skilled at her job, and she's 10 years younger than me. Even though she's really talented, she's not one to show off. Okay, thanks. Next, I'd like you to work on this.
Yes, ma'am.
When there's time, we have lunch together. If she's having a rough day, I often take her out for drinks after work to listen to her complaints. Despite our age difference, I even consider her a close friend. One day, an incident happened. That day, I finished my work ahead of schedule and left work at the normal time for the first time in a while.
I'll be late today.
What about dinner?
Don't worry about it.
While my husband was busy with work and wouldn't be home for dinner, I felt a bit lonely, but it wasn't particularly unusual. So I left the office without much thought. But upon reaching the train station, shoot, I forgot my phone. I realized I had left my smartphone at the office. Normally, I could have asked my husband, who should still be working overtime, to bring it to me. But unfortunately, I forgot my phone. With no way to reach out to anyone, I had to go back to get my phone. Although it means catching a few later trains, I decided to go back to the office.
Jenny, didn't you leave earlier?
Phil, actually, I forgot my smartphone. It was late, and not many people were left at the office. Strangely, my husband wasn't there either.
Huh, that's unfortunate. But what a perfect timing. Can you take this with you?
Is this my husband's train card?
Yeah, I found it lying around. David left earlier. He'll need it tomorrow morning.
I see. Thank you. It looked like my husband had more availability at work all of a sudden. I checked my smartphone, but there were no messages from him. Changes at work happen all the time. Often my husband runs out of battery on his phone, so perhaps that was why he hadn't contacted me today. With this in mind, I decided to head straight home with our forgotten things. If my husband had returned, I would have to prepare dinner. As I walked home, I planned our meal based on what was in the fridge.
Mom, welcome home.
I'm home. Sorry I'm late. I'll make dinner right away. But when I got home, my husband still hadn't returned. I checked my phone again, but still no messages. Where could he have gone? With curiosity growing, I began preparing dinner. Time really doesn't wait around. As a skilled housewife, I prepare a decent meal that looked presentable. Still, by the time we finished eating, my husband had not returned home. He's late, isn't he?
Huh?
As I finished cleaning up and relaxed with a cup of coffee, words unexpectedly slipped out of my mouth. I accidentally said something I didn't mean to. But then James said something unexpected.
Isn't Dad out cheating again today?
What? Taken aback by my son's unexpected remark, he showed a regretful expression. Looking embarrassed, he continued his words.
Mom, did you not realize?
What do you mean? Apparently, my son knew something I wasn't aware of. I then heard the details from him, reluctantly at first. It was pretty much as I had expected.
I guess it's a guy's intuition. One of my classmates got a girlfriend and started acting all excited, just like Dad. So I thought maybe that's what it was.
I see.
I thought you knew. Dad had been obviously secretive lately.
Reflecting on his words, I thought about our situation. Our company isn't exactly a toxic company, but it often requires overtime. I had never questioned why my husband came home late from work. But that was probably just me turning a blind eye. Thinking about it, there were times I smelled an unfamiliar scent on his suit when he came home late claiming overtime. I sighed and gathered my thoughts. With so many suspicions now, I couldn't continue living as before. Plus, I didn't want my son to keep carrying the weight of knowing about his dad cheating. James looked very awkward when he told me about it. Thank you for telling me. I'll leave the rest to me. Afterwards, I boldly decided to hire a detective agency. After some time, the investigation results came back showing that my husband was actually cheating on me. And I was definitely shocked when I found out who his mistress was. You were kidding, right? I couldn't help but burst into laughter. My husband's affair partner was none other than Suzanne, my team member I had been fond of. To think they had been in a relationship for 6 years was astonishing. What was going through her head when I was showing her the ropes? Was she mocking me of being all intimate with my husband? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Revenge. These words vividly came to my mind.
We need to talk.
One day as I was plotting my revenge, my husband initiated a conversation.
I'm getting married to someone who works under me. Let's get a divorce.
At the same time, he slammed a fully completed divorce application on the desk. He must have asked a friend to help.
Ever since you had our son, you haven't been as attractive or put in any effort. I'm fed up with you.
All right, I see.
Huh? You're not surprised about what's happening here? Or are you actually happy that I'm the one asking for a divorce?
I didn't say that, but I'm not just going to accept what you've done. I will definitely demand compensation, so be prepared for that. I had no hesitation about divorcing David, but if I just accepted smoothly, it would only satisfy him. I deliberately spoke provocatively. Just as I guessed, he snorted and his face got all twisted and grumpy. My love for him totally faded away.
Ugh, you're such a greedy woman. You can't even raise our son by yourself, so don't get all arrogant.
Say what you want, but I have every right to child support and compensation. I'm not the bad one here, it's all on you.
You're always so resistant. Well, whatever. Just make sure to sign those papers and submit them.
Having said his piece, he seemed satisfied. After striking the desk with the divorce papers a few times, he left our home, probably heading to Susan's. As he checked his smartphone casually, his expression slightly softened. Whatever he does now, he's just a stranger to me, and I couldn't care less. The next day, as I arrived at work, Susan ran up to me as usual.
Hi, ma'am.
Susan. She greeted me with her usual smile. I tried to respond as usual, but my lips twitched involuntarily. However, she didn't intend to keep up the act either. Upon approaching me, she withdrew her likable smile and sneered smugly.
David finally told you about us, huh? Sorry for taking your husband.
You.
Don't make a scene, please. It will be so awkward at work. Don't be a total loser, old lady.
Whispering provocatively in my ear, the scent of her perfume was the same one I had smelled from my husband. It was obviously intentional. But showing my emotions would be playing right into her hands. I kept my cool and responded. I won't do such things, but legally I will be making several claims against you.
David mentioned that. You're really greedy, aren't you? Doesn't it make you feel bad to have to ask for money from a good team member like me?
Not at all. Now, shouldn't you be working? You have tasks to do today, don't you? You're terrible. Susan couldn't handle what I said and got all mad. She's still a bit immature, I guess. Left behind were me and the stares of those around us. Following their gazes, there was my husband. He was looking at Susan with concern, as if she were the victim. I thought, does he think I'm bullying her? Absolutely ridiculous. I let out a deep sigh. Does David really see her as such an honest girl? If that's how it is, he doesn't have good judgment. He should learn more about women's feelings. That mean girl Susan needs to learn a thing or two about the real world for women, and I'm going to be the one to show her. The following week, I arrived at work early and was already busy when David showed up.
Good morning?
Since the day he left home with his carry-on bag, this was the first time David talked to me. When he entered the office, he had a fresh Monday morning look. However, as he stepped onto the floor with a formal greeting, he was met with intense stares from everyone present. Caught off guard by this unexpected reception, David voiced his confusion.
Good morning.
Unfortunately, right behind David, Susan appeared. Perhaps they no longer care about hiding it. The two of them were met with increasingly cold stares by other people. Even they must have felt it, as they looked troubled when getting to their seats.
Hey, Jenny. I hope you didn't spread any rumors about us. That would be defamation, you know.
I don't know what you're talking about. If it bothers you, why don't you ask around?
Excuse me?
Susan tried to throw a sarcastic comment my way, but I ignored it. Responding with equal sarcasm, she distorted her pretty face and began typing forcefully on her keyboard.
Excuse me, I need your signature on this document.
Ah, yes. Here you go.
Thank you. By the way, I wanted to ask you something.
Sorry, I have another appointment, so we'll talk later, okay?
Realizing she wasn't going to get anything from me, Susan then shifted her target to other colleagues, including Phil. But everyone ignored her, just as I did. The same went for David. The two were shunned by everyone at work. The only conversations they had were the bare minimum for work. If anyone tried to make small talk, they found an excuse to escape.
Hey, you're not very nice.
What are you talking about?
Playing dumb, huh? You must have done something.
Oh, I don't know what you mean. Instead of blaming others, why don't you reflect on your own actions? David tried to confront me, but I had nothing to say to him. Eventually, the two of them felt so uncomfortable that they quickly left the office as soon as lunch break began.
Those two looked pretty upset.
After the two left the office, Phil, holding a coffee, spoke to me as if to say, "Well done." Phil, I'm sorry about this.
It's fine. But are you okay? Is it hard to work?
So far so good. I'm not the type to get upset over this.
You're amazing, Jenny.
Phil laughed, pleased with my response. Then he glanced briefly at their desks.
It's so lame how they just run away when things get tough instead of facing it.
Exactly. Thank you, Phil. You're the one who spread their rumor, aren't you?
Huh? No. I just told that chatty lady about how my amazing coworker Jenny was crying because of David and Susan. She's the one who blabbed it everywhere.
You knew exactly what would happen if you told her. We finished the day by having a fancy Italian dinner with Phil and the chatty lady to celebrate our hard work, giggling like partners in crime. Afterwards, David and Susan gradually lost their place at the company. Of course, I filed for divorce and demanded compensation. The chatty lady made the story more interesting as it made its way through the department. But the drama didn't end there.
Why are you pushing your way in here?
One day, a furious man barged into the company. Turns out, he was just another guy Susan was fooling around with.
What's going on? Who is this guy?
Shut up. I haven't forgiven you for the compensation yet. Don't talk to me so casually.
Compensation? So, you had someone else besides me?
If one could describe it, it was a chaotic and hellish scene that unfolded at the company. The raw emotion of the confrontation was unbearable to watch. In the end, the situation escalated to the point where the police had to intervene. Susan quit like she was escaping from the chaos. And then my ex-husband left too, like he was trying to catch up with her. Apparently, he couldn't stand being left alone to face the scrutiny. What a pathetic man.
He's a total loser and doesn't deserve your attention. Mom, you don't need him in your life.
My son was just as uninterested in his dad. Well, that was his way of encouraging me. Now that they're not here, I'm back to work at the company, feeling more motivated. Phil remains the same. With their departure, the workplace atmosphere has dramatically improved. Now, I plan to live a happy life, supporting each other with my son.
Dad always used to keep his important things here. What about it? Is it there? Found it. The contents are... What? There's only $31,200 and $4 in it. What do you mean? Wasn't your dad supposed to have saved up a lot since he didn't spend money? That's what I thought. Hey, Mom. Is this all the money Dad had? Hey, you two. What are you doing? Since Dad is gone, I just came to take my inheritance. The sister, who had stolen my husband and been estranged from her family, appeared on the day of our father's funeral and began rummaging through the house. Apparently, she had come to claim her inheritance. It's highly inappropriate to discuss inheritance on the day of the funeral. Even if she came to discuss the inheritance, she should have waited a bit longer. My mother and I were appalled by the actions of my ex-husband and sister. But the sister, unconcerned about us, proceeded with the conversation on her own. Dad's money isn't just in this passbook, right? There must be more, isn't there? Yes, there is. All in all, it seems to total about $200,000. $200,000. That's a decent amount. But wait. Mom, you're 78 years old, right? Do you really need that much money? This house and land should be enough. You could sell the farmland and live off that, right? We don't need any more money, do we? And you have plenty of income, right? So, shouldn't I receive a bit more? I see. In that case, you can keep the $432. How about you give us the $200,000? My ex-husband and sister were implying that they wanted the $200,000 from my father's inheritance. Of course, they probably didn't expect to receive the entire $200,000. But they clearly intended to take as much money as they could. However, I had no intention of giving my dear father's money to these two. My mother felt the same way. I hate to say this, but I don't think there's any money for you two. The rights to an inheritance cannot be easily taken away or renounced. Thus, while the ex-husband and sister had assumed they would receive some of the money, they fell silent after my mother told them the truth. I am Alyssa. I'm a 34-year-old systems engineer. I married Tony 8 years ago. And now we live as a family of 4 with our 7-year-old son Kevin and 4-year-old son Eric. We live a typical life that seems ordinary. But I never imagined I could have such a life until I met my husband. During my student days, I was focused on my studies and was the type who had few friends. I used to wander around the university looking for an empty classroom to eat lunch. And if there was a sudden cancellation of classes, I, having no friends, would only find out after arriving at the university, a typical loner move. After graduating from university and starting my career, the chances of making friends decreased even more. I would talk normally with my colleagues and eat lunch with them, but I wouldn't meet them in my private time. However, about a year after joining the company, there was a sudden shortage of people for a group dating event. Because someone had dropped out, and I was hastily asked to join. I knew I was just there to make up the numbers. And I didn't expect to enjoy myself in a setting with people I didn't know. But having never participated in a group dating event before, I decided to go with a light heart, thinking that it was all an experience. That's where I met my husband. Are you also a systems engineer, Alyssa? What kind of work do you handle? I'm not very smart, so I might not understand even if you explain your job to me. Why are you sitting alone in this corner? Your drink seems low. Shall I order something for you? Unsure of what to do at the unfamiliar group dating event, and just trying to blend in and enjoy the atmosphere, my husband moved to sit next to me. It seemed he was the type to talk to various people regardless of gender, and it was my turn next. He bombarded me with questions in a rapid-fire manner. Yes. I became completely flustered, showing my social awkwardness. It wouldn't be fun for anyone to deal with such a person. Normally, people meeting me for the first time would soon feel awkward and distance themselves. I thought my husband would do the same, but he continued talking next to me. Listen to this. I used to be a bit wild and got into trouble with the police. But the owner of the car shop where I work now picked me up. Since then, I've been studying and became a mechanic. Now, I'm aiming to get a certification that's a bit of a challenge. Wow, car mechanic certifications are national qualifications, right? That's impressive. No, the one I'm about to take isn't that difficult to obtain. At first, I was a bit wary after hearing he had been in trouble with the police. But the more we talked, the more I liked his friendliness and the fact that he was now respectably reformed and working hard. He openly shared things about himself that others would normally hide, like his past troubles with the police. This was something I couldn't do. If I could have been open about my negative aspects like my husband, maybe I wouldn't have spent my student days alone. I went beyond just being impressed and felt something akin to respect as I listened to him talk, holding a glass in my hand. Just as I felt I had never met anyone like my husband before, he seemed to feel the same about me. Probably, people like my husband, who have high social skills, often gather together. So there wouldn't have been many interactions with someone with low social skills like me. Our mutual interest led to more meetings after the group dating event. And I let myself go with the flow he created, which eventually led to us dating. 3 years later, at the age of 26, we got married. It was surprising to me that I, who had been a loner, would get married so quickly. Not only was I surprised, but my parents were too. I thought you would never get married. This child isn't good at interacting with people. So I know it can be frustrating to be around him, but please bear with me. When I went to greet my husband and parents about our marriage, my father Sean and my mother Hillary, with laughter, threw some sharp words our way. They don't usually say such things, so it must have been their joy overflowing, despite their own emotions not being well controlled. My husband quickly connected with them due to his usual high communication skills. Wow, I was surprised by the size of the house. I was so nervous when I entered, I thought my heart was going to jump out of my mouth. You must have gone through a lot over the years. Not really. We've been farmers from way back. So both the fields and the house were handed down to us. That's why I work the fields, and the house is just unnecessarily big and old. Well, there are a lot of us country farmers around. Don't you ever repair or rebuild the house? We really dislike hassle. We don't desire luxury. So as long as the house is livable, that's enough for us, and we only do the minimum repairs. Neither Dad nor Mom really have any desires. They only drive a light truck for work, eat what they grow in the fields. Only buy work clothes, and because they have the fields, they don't travel. It's surprising how little money they spend. Tony works in a car shop, why not buy them a nice car? Hey, what are you saying? It's not so easy to just change cars. No. Alyssa is right, we really haven't spent much money. So maybe it's not bad to indulge occasionally. Plus, if I buy a car from Tony, it'll boost his standing at the shop, right? That's true, but I would feel too guilty if you bought a car just for that reason. If I buy a car, I'll eventually stop using it, and then I can just give it to you guys. Don't worry about it being a waste. What was supposed to be a marriage greeting somehow turned into my father discussing buying a car. I think it was a runaway train of happiness from my father being pleased about my marriage. However, since my parents really hadn't spent much money before, I think they meant it when they said indulging occasionally wouldn't be a bad idea. While the conversation during the marriage greeting veered off track, the marriage went through without a hitch. After buying the car from my husband, my father took up driving as a hobby and started driving into town even when there was no particular need. He occasionally calls my husband to ask about car-related things. So it seems their relationship is good. I thought my mother might be troubled by my father going out by himself in the car. But it turns out she's happy about it because she can send him shopping and enjoys the house to herself when he's out. I hoped our peaceful life would continue without any issues. But there was one thing that worried me. Sure enough, that worry began to disturb my peaceful life. A year after our marriage, I was pregnant with our first son and had taken a break from work. During the time when my belly was big and it was hard to move around, there was a person sprawled lazily on the house sofa. Being pregnant, I couldn't help but feel irritated by this person. Hey, big sister. It's fine if you come over, but aren't you lounging around too much? Who do you think will clean up after you leave? Yes, I know. After my husband and I started our married life, my sister Megan, who lived nearby, began visiting our house frequently. More accurately, she wasn't so much visiting as she was just lounging around. She would bring snacks from the kitchen, lie down on the living room sofa, and eat crisply while watching TV. My sister probably thinks of our house as her own home. When I pointed this out, Megan slowly lifted herself from the sofa and began wiping the table scattered with snack crumbs with a cloth. I'm thirsty. Bring me some juice. Aside from when she's being reprimanded, my sister shows no intention of heeding any advice. Moreover, anything I reprimand her about seems to be forgotten after she takes 3 steps. So I need to repeat the same warnings multiple times. Thus, she seems to have completely forgotten that I told her to get her own juice. I went to the kitchen, mindful of my belly, to get juice for my sister. I've always been pushed around by her. I've been a serious person who focused only on studies since I was a student. Whereas my sister is a free spirit, quite the opposite of me. My sister is 2 years older than me, and when I was pregnant with my first son, she was 29 and working as a clerk in an apparel store. She had continued working at the same store she started at as a part-time job during college. Her workplace has an incentive system, and just like my husband, my sister, who also has high communication skills, seemed to find her calling as a shop clerk. She is always among the top performers and seems to be earning a decent salary. Also, because she can live independently and is pretty and charming, she often attracts attention and doesn't seem in a hurry to marry. That's why, on her days off, she has the leisure to come over and laze around. I'm home. Welcome back, Tony. When my husband's voice is heard from the entrance, my sister quickly informs him from the living room that she is there. And at the same time, she sits up straight on the sofa to fix her posture. Welcome, Megan. Thanks for having me. You're about to have dinner, right? I'll be heading home then. You should have stayed for dinner. No, I shouldn't intrude on your time as a couple. As my husband entered the living room, my sister quickly finished her greeting and left the house. Her polite demeanor and the way she conducted herself were like those of a different person from the one who had been lying on the sofa. Since my sister doesn't show her slovenly side to my husband, his impression of her is different from mine. I've mentioned to my husband about her behavior when she's at our house. However, since he hasn't actually seen it, he probably doesn't have a complete picture of what my sister is like. But, even though my sister's visits to our house are a bit presumptuous, there hasn't been a major problem. Thus, I never felt the need to ask my sister not to come over. 7 years have passed since then, and now our eldest son is 7 years old. And we also have a 4-year-old second son. There hasn't been much change in my life, it remains peaceful. The only change might be that my sister has started coming over less frequently. In recent years, Big Sister has completely stopped coming over, hasn't she? Huh? Now that you mention it, yes. Why is that? Isn't it because I went back to work? It's not like I'm always at home like when I was on maternity leave or raising the kids. So the timing doesn't match up. Look, I have weekends off. And Big Sister has her days off on weekdays like you, Tony, right?
Ah.
I see. And we have the kids too. While wiping the dinner table, I remembered how my sister used to wipe up the crumbs she scattered when she ate. And I brought it up in conversation with my husband. Though I find my sister bothersome when she visits, I feel lonely now that she doesn't come by as often. I thought I'd invite her over for dinner sometime. However, it turned out that the frequency of my sister's visits hadn't really decreased. One day, while cleaning the bedroom, I found trash under the bed. Finding trash while cleaning isn't strange, but the trash that appeared was peculiar. I left the trash I found under the bed on the floor and squatted down to observe it. It was clearly an empty condom wrapper. Moreover, it was a design I had never seen before. My husband has weekdays off, and I have weekends off. On weekdays, our eldest son is at school, and our youngest son is at preschool, leaving my husband alone at home. I desperately tried to think of reasons for this item being here. But the only conclusion I could come to was that my husband was having an affair and bringing someone into our home. That night, I decided to confront my husband in the bedroom. Hey. I found this under the bed. Are you bringing someone unknown into our house? Huh? Maybe that's one we used? We've never used one like this, have we? Is that so? I don't remember. I don't really pay attention to the design. His excuses almost confirmed it. Unable to sleep with a husband who was having an affair, I decided to stop sleeping in the bedroom and slept on the living room sofa instead. The next day, after finishing work, I called my sister on the way home to talk about my husband. My sister has high social skills and more experience in relationships than me, so I thought she could give me good advice. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn. What do you think, sister? Since I can't hide it anymore, don't you think I should just admit it?
Yeah.
Tony didn't admit to the affair, sorry. The other woman is me. What? What did you just say? Refusing to believe it, I asked my sister to repeat herself. Tony's affair partner is me. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Confused by my sister's sudden confession, I didn't know what to do and hung up the phone abruptly. My mind went blank, my heart was pounding. I could feel the blood coursing through my body, yet I felt cold. I didn't have the courage to call my sister back to continue the conversation. So, I decided to go home first and hear the story from my husband. Tony, are you home? There's something important we need to talk about. Welcome back. I got here first, huh? I've sent the kids to their rooms. Let's talk, shall we? When I arrived at the living room, both my husband and my sister were there. On the table, a divorce paper. Even without talking, I understood the situation. So, my sister is your affair partner, and Tony, you plan to divorce me and remarry her.
Oh.
You're quick to understand, which helps. It's been about 3 years since around the time Eric was born. We want to get married soon. Sorry, but can we get a divorce? What choice do I have now? Knowing about you too. Things can't go back to how they were. So, you'll agree to the divorce? Good. I was worried it might get messy. See? I told you she wouldn't make a fuss. She doesn't have the guts to fight. My husband looked relieved that I accepted the divorce quickly. And next to him, my sister was smirking. How foolish of me not to notice their relationship for 3 years. However, both of them, unlike me, have more experience in relationships. And my sister knows my personality well, and my husband knows my daily patterns well. Together, it would have been easy for them to hide their affair. Probably, the trash under the bed was deliberately placed by my sister to create this situation. Given that my husband initially denied the affair and now looked relieved, I think he wasn't informed about this strategy. My sister, impatient about the marriage, must have acted on her own. As someone who's not good at confrontation, I couldn't immediately think of any retorts to them, and I could only feel anger looking at their faces. Here, just sign this. Unable to say anything, my sister handed me the divorce papers. Even after all this, I couldn't respond, and tears started to well up in my eyes. Not wanting to be seen crying, I snatched the divorce papers from my sister and quickly left the house. After that, the divorce was finalized quickly. I took the kids and returned to my parents' home. What? Tony did? What a thing to do. That Megan, what is she thinking? Naturally, my parents were furious. I'm really sorry that it came to this. But we're serious. My father called them over and yelled at them, but it seemed to have no effect. Their resolve seemed firm, but it could also be an act just to calm the situation. Even if they were serious, an affair is still an affair. Realizing that their words lacked sincerity, my father decided to cut ties with my sister. Also, he returned the car that was bought during our marriage to my husband. It seemed like a severance to prevent them from relying on us if they ever faced financial difficulties. My ex-husband and sister were pleased with their unexpected gain, and kept their promise to my father by never showing up or contacting us again. I ended up living with my children at my parents' home. Since I can't commute from my parents' home, I decided to change jobs. The new workplace is about an hour-and-a-half drive from my parents' house. So it's quite a challenge. However, working as a system engineer while raising children is tough. So I have to rely on my parents for childcare. Therefore, a bit of inconvenience for me is bearable. Mom, is dinner good today? I picked the eggplants we're eating. And I picked these bell peppers. I was worried that the divorce would significantly change the kids' lives. But that seems to be no issue. The kids are getting along well with my parents and enjoy helping with the farming. The parents appreciate the kids helping with the work. Despite the major incident of being betrayed by my ex-husband and sister, it seems I've managed to regain a peaceful life. This peaceful life continued without issues for 15 years. But it was disrupted again by those two when my father passed away at the age of 80. My sister did not show up at the funeral. Since we've cut ties, it's no problem if she doesn't come. However, after the ceremony was over and we returned home, My ex-husband and sister were waiting in front of the house. Finally, you're back. Geez, we've been tired of waiting. Let us in already. Standing around has exhausted us. Both were dressed casually, not at all appearing as if they had come for a funeral. Grinning, the two of them approached my mother and me. I had a bad feeling about this. However, there was a chance they came to offer incense for my father. Reluctantly, my mother and I decided to let my ex-husband and sister into the house. It's been a long time since I've been back. 15 years, huh? Tony, this way. As they entered, my sister boldly walked deeper into the house, and my ex-husband followed her. My mother and I regretted letting them in almost immediately and followed them hesitantly. Dad always used to keep his important things here. What about it? Is it there? Found it. The contents are... What? There's only $31,200 and $432 in it. What do you mean? Wasn't your dad supposed to have saved up a lot since he didn't spend money? That's what I thought. Hey, Mom. Is this all the money Dad had? My ex-husband and sister were rummaging through my parents' bedroom, going through my father's bank books. It seemed unnecessary to check, but I did it anyway. Hey, you two. What are you doing? Since Dad is gone, I just came to take my inheritance. My mother and I both sighed simultaneously. The expression on my ex-husband's face as he peered into the bank book bore no resemblance to his serious demeanor from 15 years ago. He looked completely frivolous now, and his actions were outrageous. It's unthinkable that my former husband would have come to discuss inheritance on the day of the funeral. He would have at least waited until after the month memorial in the past. It appears that over these 15 years, under my sister's bad influence, he reverted to his reckless younger days. Moreover, my sister, as always, was desperate about money and kept pushing the conversation forward regardless of our dismay. Dad's money isn't just in this passbook, right? There must be more, isn't there? Yes, there is. All in all, it seems to total about $200,000. $200,000. That much? Let's say we give half, $100,000, to your mother, and split the rest between Alyssa and Megan. So, each of us gets $50,000. That's a decent amount, isn't it? But wait. Mom is 78 years old, right? Does she really need that much money? This house and land should be enough. We could sell the farmland and live off that, right? We don't need any more money, do we? Besides, Alyssa had a respectable job as a system engineer. So you must have plenty of income now, right? So, shouldn't I receive a bit more? I see. In that case, you can keep the $432. How about you give us the $200,000? I've heard that anger is the strongest of emotions. I am feeling that to be true right now. Just moments ago, I was overflowing with sadness at my father's funeral. But now, I am filled with rage towards my ex-husband and sister, and my sadness has vanished. My ex-husband and sister are demanding the $200,000 from my father's inheritance. Of course, they probably didn't expect to receive the entire $200,000. But they clearly intended to take as much money as they could. However, I have no intention of giving my dear father's money to these two. My mother seems to agree. I hate to say this, but I don't think there's any money for you too. What? What do you mean? Although I was manipulated by them 15 years ago, it looks like I can turn the tables on them this time. After hearing my mother's words, my ex-husband and sister looked at each other. After a few seconds of silence, their laughter broke the quiet. What's that? Are you saying I don't have the right to inherit Dad's money? Even if Megan was cut off, she is still the eldest daughter of this house. You can't just deny her inheritance. Exactly. Even if the will says not to give me any money, I'll still claim my mandatory share. Unfortunately, you can't just take away someone's right to inheritance. My ex-husband and sister laughed triumphantly, convinced they wouldn't be stopped by my mother and me. Indeed, my sister is entitled to a mandatory share of the estate. Focusing solely on the money left by my father, my sister has the right to at least receive $50,000. The mandatory share takes precedence over the will. Therefore, even if the will stated that my sister should not receive a penny, if she disagrees with its contents, she can claim $50,000. Moreover, as my ex-husband said, it is legally very difficult to arbitrarily take away or make my sister renounce her mandatory share. But, my mother and I already knew this. The will has yet to be verified, so we don't know exactly what Dad wrote yet. But I think it probably doesn't say to not give my sister a single penny. If she wants to claim her mandatory share, she should go ahead. And how do you plan to stop me from getting the money? Don't be stubborn. $200,000, no, even $100,000 is fine. Just hand it over willingly. It seems that my mother has finally reached her limit. With the increasingly despicable expressions of my ex-husband and sister, I decide to confront them with a critical piece of information I've been holding back. Kevin and Eric have become Dad's adopted sons. My ex-husband and sister, who are usually well-versed in matters of inheritance, seem to grasp the situation from just this one sentence from my mother. They look at each other and then fall silent. I suppose they are frantically recalculating their potential inheritance and reassessing the situation. However, there are parts they might not understand after being estranged for 15 years. So I'll take over from my mother and explain. Kevin and Eric have been helping out with Dad and Mom's farm work ever since they came here. Kevin is graduating from university this year, but he plans to become a farmer here instead of finding a job. Eric is still a sophomore in college, but he intends to be a farmer after he graduates, just like Kevin. Does that mean they're taking over the family business? Exactly. To facilitate this, it would be cumbersome for my mom and me to inherit the land and money, and then pass it on to the boys, dealing with all the rights transfers and taxes, right? That's why, a few years ago, Kevin and Eric became Dad's adopted sons so they could directly inherit Dad's land. I'm not sure how the land is divided without checking the will, though. He disliked complicated matters. He said this method was clear and best. Kevin and Eric plan to be farmers, and since Alyssa is divorced, her last name hasn't changed. Becoming adopted sons didn't change their lives because Alyssa continued to live with them and remained their guardian. They agreed to this since it brought no change to their lives. So, if the two kids are adopted, that means Dad had 4 children. If we split $100,000 among 4, that's $25,000 each. It's halved. Well, getting $25,000 is still good. I still think it's impressive how my ex-husband can turn negative situations into something positive. However, I have no intention of just handing over that $25,000. Sis, you guys got a car from Dad, right? And it was a pretty good one at that. Doesn't that count as an advance on the inheritance? Upon hearing this, my ex-husband and sister exchange looks and fall silent again. It seems they are aware of what advancement on inheritance means. Advancement on inheritance is considered when a person has received a significant amount of money, expensive land, or buildings from the deceased during their lifetime to prevent unfairness among the other heirs. This includes gifts like cars. This means that the car received by my sister can be considered as an advancement of the inheritance, and its value can be deducted from what she receives in the inheritance. The car Dad gave you was the one we bought a year before we divorced, right? It was the one you suggested we buy when we sold the old car at the third inspection. After using it for 7 years and buying it before we got married. How much was that car? It was new for $30,000. And how much would it be worth if sold after a year? If it's new and only a year old, it depreciates about 30%, so about $21,000. So, from the $25,000, we deduct $21,000, which means you guys would receive $4,000. What? Only $4,000? $4,000 is still a significant amount. However, when they expected to receive part of $200,000 and end up with only $4,000, their shock is understandable. Hearing that they would receive only $4,000, my ex-husband and sister suddenly start to panic. Hey, can't we get $50,000? Or even just $25,000? Please, we really need the money. Why do you need so much money? I used to work in apparel, right? You always bragged about your good performance and decent salary. But, after turning mid-30s, well, my appearance changed, you know? And my performance started to decline. That led to a decrease in my salary. So I switched jobs, but that didn't work out, and now I'm working part-time at a supermarket. I see. You relied on your youth and looks and didn't develop any skills. So when you tried to find a new job, there weren't good conditions available. Well, in this day and age, being mid-30s with no skills is tough. But Tony has skills, right? You should have some income. That's the thing. The boss found out about my remarriage plans and got mad. After that, I couldn't focus on work, and he kicked me out. Seeing how irresponsible and nonsensical you've become, I can imagine. The boss who helped you turn your life around was repaid with betrayal. After all the help you've received over the years. Getting kicked out means you can't even complain about unfair dismissal. So I moved to another company. But it seems the old boss was quite generous with my salary. When I changed jobs, my salary dropped significantly. On top of that, I paid the compensation for our divorce in one lump sum. And I've been paying child support, right? So I've always been strapped for cash. I see, that's why the child support payments stopped a few years ago. Your incomes dropped drastically. So, you came here to claim Dad's inheritance. Being overly familiar with legal terms like mandatory shares and special benefits was in preparation in case we refused to pass on Dad's inheritance. I'm sorry. I'm barely making ends meet even with the child support payments. It's okay. I know that claiming unpaid child support rarely resolves anything. Besides, once the boys became Dad's adopted children, you were no longer required to pay child support. As they realize they will only receive $4,000, my ex-husband and sister's spirits sink even further. They had clearly been counting on a substantial portion of Dad's estate. The two of them now sit dejectedly, staring at the floor. However, it seems my sister is gradually beginning to harbor an unreasonable anger towards my ex-husband. This is your fault. What? If you had earned more, we wouldn't have had to come back here to face this humiliation. The lack of money is because you, just like when you were young, spend extravagantly on clothes and whatnot. If you managed your money better, our lives would be a bit easier. Are you saying this is my fault? You lied about the boss planning to let you take over the company. Turns out you were just leeching off him. You said you loved me regardless of my income. That's definitely a lie. I was fooled by your lies. What? It was a lie? Then I was fooled by your lies too. My ex-husband and sister began bickering like children, accusing each other of deception. From my point of view, both are equally at fault. There are no signs of the children inside the house. They probably went to check on the fields since they couldn't during the funeral all day. I decide to kick out my ex-husband and sister before the children return. Please take that argument back to your own home. Wait, please. Is there any way we can work something out with the money? $4,000 is too little. We need at least $25,000. Facing the pleading pair, I cross my arms and glare at them in silence. Realizing that persuading me is futile, my ex-husband and sister dejectedly walk out of the house. With that, it's unlikely they will come to this house again. My ex-husband and sister ended up receiving only a small part of my father's inheritance and continued their previous lifestyle. My ex-husband works as a mechanic in a small company. And although my sister is only working part-time, she does have a job. Thus, it's not that they can't make a living at all. However, the average monthly salary for a mechanic with vocational training is about $1,700. My ex-husband, although he has vocational training and is over 50, probably earns about $2,000. Still, I believe he is working for a relatively low salary. Therefore, it must be hard for the two of them to live on their earnings alone without being able to save any money. The fact that they don't have any children between them is likely due to these financial circumstances. My ex-husband mentioned that if my sister managed her money better, they could live more comfortably, so it seems like an easily solvable problem. However, my sister is 51 this year. She has been spending money recklessly up to this age, and given her personality, it seems unlikely she will change her ways immediately. For them, life might be bearable now. But the real hardship of having no savings and no one to rely on will hit when they become elderly in 10 or 20 years. Surely, they are already feeling plenty of anxiety about the struggles they will likely face in the not-too-distant future. I continue to work as a system engineer. My eldest son graduated from university and became a farmer. My younger son is still in university, so he is helping out with his brother's work. The brothers, working together, are well regarded by the older farmers in the community as hardworking young farmers. With this, I have no worries about the children. My mother and I proudly watch over the efforts of my eldest and youngest sons.